Okay, I think we're back here, guys. Sorry about that. I really have no idea why the power flipped out for a moment. Really sorry about that. My apologies. Alright, let me just make sure that everybody can hear me and everything. Audio video is good again. Welcome back. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're good to go. Alright, so let's pick back up. I'm trying to remember exactly where I left off at. I think we're about to get into a brand new position that we were going to look at, focusing on more forcing pawn examples. Let's see. No sound. Sound's back. Great. Okay, I think we're good. All right, so let's get back into this new example that we're going to focus on. Let me make sure everything's good on my end. Everything looks okay for me. A position with the Queen's Gambit. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I think that's what I had queued up here. All right, I think we are good to go. Okay, so let's go ahead and check out the next example. So this next example starts off with the opening d4, d5, c4, knight f6, pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, knight f3, knight c6. Okay, so let's say we're in this situation here, and white is thinking about another example of a pawn move here. White is thinking about the move e4. So we've kind of done a breakdown of, in some of the other examples so far, we've talked about, why is this a forcing move? What's the advantages and disadvantages here? Combine all of that information together and kind of let me know, what do you think about the move e4? Give me some reasons. I'm not going to ask all the questions individually again, because we have an idea of what the questions are that we should think about here. But how do we evaluate this move, pawn to e4, in this particular situation? Okay, so let's see what you guys are saying here. A good move, controls the center with tempo, opens the f-bishop, controls the center, threatens the knight on d5. Good move, great pawn center, opens up the bishop. Good, good. Knight has several escape squares. Follow-up might be d5, possibly. That is true. If the knight moves away, we could possibly follow up with the move d5 after that, continuing to push black around if we wanted to. The good, it gains space, takes control of the center, and forces back the knight to a more passive square. The downside, our pawns might become weak in the center and attack later. It's a forcing move. Okay, so ultimately, this is an example just kind of like the previous example we looked at with the move e5, attacking the knight that was on f6. This is an example of another forcing move that pretty much has nothing but upsides. There's really no downsides to this e4 move in this position. Yes, we are technically giving up control of d3, f3, d4, f4 if we make this move, but really, those squares are under control pretty well anyways. e4 has pretty much no downside in this situation. We're going to get the two pawns next to each other. We control the entire center of the board. Very good pawn center. The knight's going to have to move away somewhere. Let's say the knight now goes back to the square f6. Okay, so black has retrieved the knight, and we have a great pawn center right now. Now, let's say that we're continuing this thinking here a little bit, and let's say we now have two options. We're thinking about either pawn to d5, which we'll evaluate first of all, and we'll also talk about pawn up to e5. Both of them forcing moves once again. They're both attacking a minor piece, the knight in this case. Let's look at d5 first. If we make the move pawn to d5, how do you evaluate this move? I'm not saying you have to make the move d5 in this position necessarily, but we're just kind of talking about it for the sake of the lesson topic here. You don't have to play d5 or e5. You could also just develop a knight, which would be absolutely fine as well. Yeah, Rodolfo, it's more theoretically. Like I said, you don't have to play d5 or e5 necessarily. It's more kind of, theoretically based on the topic of the lesson. Okay, let's see what you guys are saying now. Let me look here. It controls d5 and the pawns are now. d5 is better. d5 is much better because e4 is covered. Better than e5 since the pawns protect other pawns. Gains space and kicks back the knight. Makes the pawn be defended. Okay. So ultimately in this position here, d5 does end up being a reasonable option. We could make the move d5. It would be absolutely fine in this position. The main difference, as we'll talk about with the move e5 in a moment, is going to be the control of the squares we're giving up. So when we make the move d5, what squares are we giving up control of? We're hitting the knight, but we're giving up control of squares. Which squares are those if we make this move? Ari, it doesn't look like you've been banned or anything like that. I think you're okay to keep, answering questions and stuff like that. Okay, so if you make the move d5, we're giving up control of c5 and e5. Absolutely correct. However, black is not really able to use c5 yet, and what's going on with e5? If we do make the move d5, we give up control of e5, but is black able to use this square here? Is the knight able to move into, like, e5, for example? Okay, this is a situation where the knight cannot move into e5 here. We have our knight on f3 adequately controlling that square. If black moves the knight in, we're of course just going to take the knight for free. So the knight would have to move away once again. The knight would have to go either back to, b4, a5, or b8. b4 doesn't really work because we now have tactics based on queen a4 check. a5 is kind of, we might just play the move b4 and trap the knight, so that's pretty good. So pretty much the knight's going to have to go back to b8. At least that's the safest square. So d5 in this case ends up being a good move. Now, we do have to be a little bit careful that we are, pushing the pawns and not developing pieces. We are, possibly overextending a little bit, but we are also forcing black to be behind on development. Black had 2 minor pieces developed, now he only has 1, and we can develop our knight, and our position is very solid at this point. If black's not careful, we might even play e5 after this, now that our d5 pawn's defended. So d5 ends up being a reasonable option here. Now let's switch over to looking at the e-pawn advance. Let's say we're thinking about the move e5. What's the difference between e5 and d5? They're both attacking knights, but there is a difference between the two. Okay, so let's see here. Creates an outpost for black on d5. e5 is not good because we give up control of d5. d4 will be weakened and attacked. Knight d5, knight d5. e4 and d5 are now available for black now. Okay, so the big difference here between the moves e5 and the move d5 is, again, like I said, what you're giving up control of and how are you controlling that. d5 was okay because our knight covered e5. He couldn't move into the e5 square. On the other hand, e5 is not near as good as d5 because we don't control this d5 square anymore. The knight will move into d5. That is an outpost for the knight. We have no other pawn that can control that d5 square. Our e-pawn has already moved too far forward, and we don't have a c-pawn anymore. So this knight's going to have a very nice outpost on d5. Now, white is up on space. It's not terrible, but we've given black more than he previously had. Previously, we were just pushing black back and not giving him any good squares. This case, we are giving him a nice square on d5. So, if you had to pick between the two moves, let's say you could only make one of these two moves. Now, obviously, you can make other moves in a real game. You could, develop knight c3 or something. But if you had to pick between these two moves, which is ultimately the better option? Okay, so you guys are saying d5. There you go. So again, remember, whenever you're making a pawn move in chess, because the reason I'm focusing on this is because I see many students of my own, many Prodigy program players, when we review their games and stuff like that, I see many people, even higher rated people, like 1500 plus and stuff like that sometimes, they'll sometimes make pawn moves that attack a certain piece, and all of a sudden they've weakened a square, or it might have hit the piece, but there's more downsides or there's more disadvantages to the pawn move than there are advantages. So it's not something that's just unique to your rating level. It's also, even higher rated players sometimes, have some problems with this as well. But if you can understand and evaluate forcing pawn moves better in your own games, that'll help you to gain more space in the center. It'll be better to push your opponent's pieces around. It'll help you to control the center more adequately. And ultimately, if you control more of the center, if you have more space, it simply makes your game easier to play. So what we're going to do now is look at a full game pretty much. We're going to mainly focus on the opening and the middle game. But ultimately, we're going to look at a good chunk of this game here, and we're going to evaluate the different pawn moves that happen in this game. So let's go ahead and look at this game example, and we're going to talk about a lot of the pawn moves that are made. So let me make a new game here and put this one on board. Okay, so we're going to look at this from black's point of view. Now, as you're going to see here at the beginning of the game, white is going to make a lot of pawn moves. I'm not saying that these moves are good. I'm just showing you what's in the game. And this is not a Grandmaster game. This is a game taken from, this is one that I found online a while back, and it's, within your rating category to some degree. So this is not a Grandmaster game or anything. So the game starts off with e4. Black plays e5, reasonable. White plays d3, knight to c6, pawn to f4, bishop c5, pawn to f5. Okay, so even at this point in the game, we're 4 moves in. What has white done? What has black done? Okay, Throw says that white has extended his pawns into black territory. Okay, that is true. He has kind of crossed the board, crossed the midway point of the board. White has weakened himself on the dark squares. Absolutely true. Most pawns here are on light squares, which means that because light square pawns control light squares, that means they're not controlling dark squares. So these dark squares are kind of like the Swiss cheese holes in the position here. Not that well controlled by white. That's absolutely true. He's weakened his king side a bit. That is true as well. Roman Master says d3 seems like a waste since you'd want to eventually challenge black in the center with d4. Yeah, d3 wasn't a particularly good move. Like I said, these are not Grandmaster games or anything like that. Let's see. Black has developed more. Absolutely true. We got 2 pieces developed, and white's done nothing but pawn moves at this point. Okay, so in this position here, now it's up to black to figure out what to do. So we're going to kind of learn from what black did in this game, and we're going to learn how we could have done something better. So black in the game here made the move d6. Now, d6 is not a bad move. It's not terrible by any means. Simply, pushing a pawn, opening up the light square bishop, stuff like that. But instead of making the move d6, keep in mind that, remember, we're up in development. What might be a better move in this position than the move d6? d6 is passive, Kingfishy Dude. I absolutely agree with that. And a lot of you guys have already typed this move out. So a lot of people here are saying the move d5. Very good. I absolutely agree with you. d5 is the better move. Definitely better than d6 in this situation. Knight f6, developing the knight would not be bad either, but I would generally lean towards just hammering the center right away here. We're up on development. We can attack our opponent in the center of the board because our lead in development helps us in that case. Now, let's go ahead and see the result of the move d5. So let's say we go for d5. Our simple threat here, let's say white does nothing, right? Let's say he does absolutely nothing here. Let's say he makes some other random pawn move for whatever reason. Obviously, this is a bad move, but what is black threatening after the move d5? So go ahead and, think here a bit. What would you do if you were black in this position? Two pieces developed, pawns on e5 and d5. It's our move here. What to do? I'll talk about bishop takes g1 in just a moment. I'm glad you noticed that, but I'll go over that move in just a second here. Okay, so Picard says d takes e, Throw says d takes e4, Culp says we take on e4 and queen h4 check next. Take. Once we take, queen takes d1, take e4, then take the queen and keep white from castling. Okay, so a lot of people are agreeing with taking on e4 here. I think taking on e4 is absolutely the best move. Take on e4, white takes back. Now, in this position, some people, our first instinct is to trade queens. While trading queens would not be it wouldn't be bad. It's not like it's not the best move, but it's not, it's not bad at the same time. There is simply a better move in the position, and that ends up being the move queen h4. Now, generally, the principle is not to bring your queen out too early in the game, but what's the problem for white after a check on h4 here? Yeehaw, I think you mean bishop f2. Bishop f2 almost would have worked, but the king could go to e2 and keep the queen protected. That almost works, though. It's not a bad idea. But queen h4 is simply better. What's the issue with for white after queen h4? Okay, hanging pawn. We're going to take on e4 here. g3 would not be advised whatsoever because we would take e4 with check and also pick up the rook on the h1 square at the same time. So instead, white would have to move the king, but this is also very bad. If he moves the king somewhere, we can just go ahead and probably just take the pawn, I guess. We're up a pawn, f5 is going to fall, the king is super weak, we threaten mate on e3. This is terrible. This is terrible for white here. So ultimately, after the move d5, black's threat is to take on e4 and open up the center. Play queen h4, and, just by making this move d5, it's not forcing in the sense of, other positions we looked at, the pawn moves were attacking pieces. d5 is a forcing move, though, because the threat is there. We threaten to take the pawn and make the check. Now, let's say white takes our pawn. He takes on d5. Let's say we take back with the queen, right? We don't want to, give him a free pawn. And let's say here, for example, white plays knight c3. Developing the knight, hitting the queen. We got to move the queen or we got to deal with this. What can we do to answer this threat on our queen? There's probably a couple options, but what can we do here to keep up some pressure on our opponent? Yeah, we're going to go a bit over time, Blizzard Boom, because of the my electricity not deciding if it's going to work or not for whatever reason. Okay, some people are saying bishop to b4, some are saying queen d4. I would probably lean towards queen d4. Queen d4 immediately threatens mate, still has possible queen h4 check ideas, and we're still threatening, now that the e4 pawn is gone, we're also threatening the f5 pawn. So we're threatening both of these at the same time. White would have to play something like queen f3 to guard both. And then we can just, we can just continue developing or something like that. Ultimately, I would say black has the better position. f5 is weak. You know, the king is still exposed. We have this big lead in development. White can defend, but we still have a pretty good position. Maybe one day knight b4 hits the c2 pawn. Different little problems for black or for white like that. Ultimately, though, in the game, d5 was not played. The move d6 was the move that was played. However, as we can see here, d5 is better. It attacks the center. We have a lead in development, stuff like that. Oh, hey, Tip and Shimmy. This is Dalton Perrine. Mr. Perrine. I like the Mr. Okay, so d6 was played in the game, though. Let's see what happens after this. And d6 is passive. I definitely agree that this is not the best move. White finally developed his first piece, but that's not going to last for very long. Black played bishop d7, pawn to c3, another pawn move. Queen e7, pawn to b4, which is a forcing move, so the bishop retreats. Pawn to a4. White really doesn't like to develop pieces for some reason. There is a threat, though, of a5 to trap the bishop, so black, gives his bishop a little escape square. White makes another pawn move. Black castles, and white makes a pretty much 9th pawn move. Now, believe me, I didn't make this game up. This was actually a game I found. Lots of pawn moves, though. So in this position, again, it's black's move right now. A bit of a different situation than earlier, but ultimately we're still looking for ways to open the center up, use our lead in development somehow, things like that. Sergey Smart says white is much better now. Let's talk about that for a moment. White controls more space, that is true, but would you guys say that white's better, or what's the problem with white here? And I'm not specifically calling you out. I was going to talk about that anyways. White controls more space, but what's the problem with the position? Junabo says everything. It's pretty close. I like the way Yeehaw thinks as well. Less setting up after losing. Once he resigns, he's already got the pieces on their starting squares, so he doesn't have to set those back up. So ultimately here, there's one piece developed, which is, I'm even surprised the knight's developed here, based on how white's played so far. He's at least got one piece developed. All right, Ari, I'll accept later, after the lesson. But other than that, no development, weak king, not castle, so many problems here for white in this position. White is overextended, but it is true. You are correct, Sergey. Black is cramped. That is true. We're going to work to fix that. That's the whole goal here. Even though we're a bit cramped, we're going to look to break out of this box in a way. So Kolb here mentions d5 for black now to open up. Let's look at this option. So we looked at d5 earlier on move number 4, and it was good at that point. d5 is definitely a bit different at this point. If we go for the move d5 in this position, what's going on with this move? Let's, well, before I say anything else, let me have you guys answer that question. We're going to go 10 minutes overtime. I think the power was out for about 10 minutes or 5 minutes or something like that, but we'll go 10 minutes over. So d5 looks a bit risky here. I will say that if you don't have your stuff planned out at the moment, d5 looks like it simply loses a pawn. It looks like white could capture the pawn. He's hitting your knight. We can't recapture on d5. If we take f5, we lose the knight, for example. That doesn't seem very good. But in this position here, is there anything we can do as a follow-up? We generally don't want to retreat if we can help it. But what can we do as a follow-up here? I think some people have mentioned the idea so far, but what can we do? Continuing again with our forcing pawn moves. Once again, that's the whole topic of the lesson. That's why this game ends up being very, very interesting. Okay, so a lot of you guys are saying e4 now. So e4 is another example of a forcing pawn move here. E4 is threatening the knight, of course. That's attacking, that's forcing. And also, aside from threatening the knight, let's say the knight moves away for some reason. I don't know, let's say like knight d2. What can we do next from here? What's the next follow-up for black at this point? We'll look at him capturing the pawn as well, but let's say he moves the knight away. Let's see, e takes d3, pawn takes pawn check, knight e5, he takes d3, discovered check, take on g5. Okay, so taking on d3 continues the forcing ideas here. Taking on d3, and pretty much white can just resign here. It's not checkmate yet, because he'll have to block with the knight or the bishop. But once the bishop blocks, we're just gonna, we're just gonna take here and win a piece. Queen takes back. Pretty much, if we wanted to, we could just trade queens, I guess. Or, I mean, there's lots of things that win here. You could go knight e5. You could just trade queens and retreat your knight, and you're up a piece. I mean, there's so many different things that win here. That's not how you say my name. Yeah, I know I'm not going to get everybody's name correct. I'm just doing the best with what I've got here. I'm sorry. I apologize if that's, not the right pronunciation on your name. So ultimately, moving the knight doesn't work. We're going to take on d3 with the discovered check, and white's going to get blown off the board, essentially. That was your idea to play e4 after taking on d5? Very good, very good. So let's say the white takes the pawn, though. Right? This is probably a little bit of a better option. We take back with check, and let's say here, let's say the bishop blocks. Bishop e2. Now, our knight is still under attack. We still got to be a little careful about that. But what can we do from here in this position? White doesn't have any hope. I agree. It's very grim position for white here. Absolutely. Okay, so knight e5 does work because the knight on f3 is pinned. That is true. Not a bad option whatsoever. There's also another move that I kind of think is a little bit better than knight e5. Now, knight e5 is not bad by any means, but maybe something else that's a little more, I don't know, a little more punch to the position, I guess. Knight e5 does threaten the knight, though, so I guess there's some other stuff as well. Rook e8, rook e8. White should have taken d5. Yeah, I agree white shouldn't take on d5 in the first place, but I dare you to say it on stream. I'll try to practice it off stream. I'm probably not going to get the pronunciation, but sorry about that. Okay, so in this position, I'm leaning towards... I think bishop takes f5 is pretty good as well. Bishop takes f5, regains our pawn, so we're not even down a pawn anymore. And the nice thing here is the d-pawn is pinned, right? So if he takes our knight, we're just going to take the queen. That's very good. So we're threatening to get the d5 pawn back. Now our bishop is active. We're going to take, get the knight developed pretty soon. Knight e5 still might come soon. Black is definitely in the driver's seat at this point. Black is absolutely winning this position. Should be not too difficult for black to, finish off white with some kind of big attack. If white plays knight d2 for some reason, we just take back on d5. If we could take back on d5. I guess you could also play like queen e3 and threaten mate if you wanted to. Lots of problems for white, or for black, or yeah, for white in this example here. So ultimately, d5 is a very strong move here. Now, of course, white doesn't have to take on d5, but what is black's threat in this position again? Let's say white again makes some random pawn move. Again, I don't recommend this by any means, but let's say for the sake of argument, white makes another pawn move. He's already moved 9 of them, so let's say he makes a 10th one. What is black able to do from here? What's the continuation for black at this point? Okay, we could take on to e4. There you go. Once again, we're just looking to open up lines and use our lead in development. So once the pawn takes back on e4, what next? Okay, bishop takes f5, Real Moon Master said, yeehaw, other people as well. There you go. So bishop takes f5, very good. Opening up a discovered attack on the queen. We're up a pawn in this position, which is pretty good. You know, maybe the queen moves away to guard e4. But then we can just play, I don't know, bishop back to e6, bishop to g4. We're up a pawn already. Oops, don't take that. We're already up a pawn with a good position. Definitely, you know, better for black at this point. Not really winning just yet, but definitely black with the advantage here. So once again, the important thing here is that, first of all, when you have a lead in development, you want to open up the center. We see that with the move d5 on move number 4, on move number 10 here, looking to open up the center when you have extra pieces developed. But even if you don't have a lead in development, generally you want to look for these forcing pawn moves that create threats, but you do have to analyze whether they're good pawn moves or whether they're bad pawn moves. White has made a lot of pawn moves, but they're not really good ones here. Some of them were forcing. You know, for example, when he played b4 and hit the bishop, that was forcing. a4 was forcing because it was threatening to trap the bishop. But overall, white has made too many pawn moves, right? He's got no development pretty much. Black has only made, you know, 2 or 3 pawn moves here, but he's got the better position as long as he's able to get out of this kind of cramped box. d5 is the way to blow open the position and get into the flood his pieces on the white side of the board and really get the advantage here. Now, unfortunately, black did not play the move d5 in the game. Black played a different move, g6, which is also still threatening the center. I'm going to just kind of fast forward through the next couple of moves just to show you how the game continued. White played f6, another pawn move. And the h3 is another pawn move. Black played h6 now, though. h6 is a good move here to undermine, you know, break apart these pawns a bit. Knight a3, take, take, take. Black still has the better position here. Black's up a pawn. Black did go on to actually lose this game. I'm not going to go through the whole entire game just because of time, but mainly we focused on, so far in the opening and middle game here, on the idea of pushing pawns in the center in order to create threats, in order to force your opponent to do something, in order to make them react. But the idea here is that, you know, you want to be able to evaluate these pawn pushes and have them, you know, if it's in your favor, that's great. If it's not good to do, you don't want to make the pawn move because you got to keep in mind, pawns can't go backwards. So anytime you're making a move, you want to evaluate the move for sure. Yeah, this was a blitz game as well. So Tip and Jimmy, you're definitely a little bit right there. The blitz does it kind of influence the rest of the game. Black does get a good position, but I think he ends up like running into trouble in the endgame or something like that. Okay, so the main thing here with this game, and all the examples we've looked at so far, is that we want to be able to just evaluate different pawn moves in our own games. Whether it's a forcing pawn move, or even just any pawn move in general, make sure that you're not giving up too much control of certain squares that are going to be weak. Make sure that you're not just making random threats that your opponent can defend against, and then you're having some kind of weakness with your pawn move. You want to make sure that you're evaluating the advantages and disadvantages of your moves and different things like that. So that's it for this lesson. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. Hopefully you have a better appreciation for the importance of evaluating forcing pawn moves and trying to make sure that they have more advantages than disadvantages before deciding to make the move or not. So I'm just going to share here at the very end for a brief conclusion some of the details about the Prodigy program. If there's any of you here who would like to try structured online learning and start your journey towards mastery this year, you can enroll in the Prodigy program, which does start next weekend on January 13th, next Saturday. I'm going to list off some of the topics for the 1200 section here at this point, just to give you guys an idea of what's coming up in the future lessons if you're interested. The 1200 section topics are going to be mastering all the basics of chess and covering the prerequisites. We're going to be talking about different endgames involving the king and queen versus the king and rook versus the king and 2 bishops versus the king. We're going to talk about imbalanced multi-piece endgames and different tricks in the endgame. We're going to talk about forcing moves and tactics with a detailed study on improving forcing play. We're going to talk about critical squares, weak squares, outposts, and improving your thought process as well. So right here, you know, the official Chess University account, also linked in here the course list, the syllabus. So feel free to look at those. I'm going to go ahead and copy this myself and paste it. So that's for you guys if you're interested in continuing with the Prodigy program. Next weekend is the next lesson. It's going to be next Saturday, once again at 12 o'clock noon Pacific time. But you'll have to sign up. There is also an option if you want to just get the live lessons. There is a $25 option. But normally tuition is $100, but that also comes with a lot of video recordings and additional information and stuff like that. Now, if you guys are interested, tomorrow there are actually some more free live lessons. I know a lot of people like the free aspect for sure. Tomorrow there are some more free live lessons this weekend. Tomorrow on Sunday, the 2000 lesson starts at 9 a.m. Pacific time. The 1750 lesson starts at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. And the 1500 lesson starts at 12 o'clock noon Pacific time. So I'm going to kind of copy this and link it here. Give you guys some more information if you're interested in some of the other section lessons. You know, just in case you're not entirely sure which section you should start in. And also there's the link for the Prodigy Program Lite, which is the $25 option if anybody's interested in that one. Okay, so that's it for me, guys. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the lesson today. Hopefully you enjoyed the one earlier with FIDE Master Arnie, if you guys did attend that one as well. I will see you guys around in a future video or lesson for, you know, next week's Prodigy program. Hopefully I see some of you guys sign up for it. I look forward to seeing you guys again in the near future. And I will talk with all of you guys again in the future. All right, have a good rest of the day, everybody. Hope you guys have a good rest of the weekend, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.